Welcome to the Strain Podcast, a Southgate Media Group production, where we talk all about Guillermo del Toro's new smashing horror fantasy series, The Strain, that airs on Sunday nights on FX. I'm your host, Blair Knight-Graves, an associate editor from Show Ratings TV, and with me today is Kyle Tremblay, the editor-in-chief at Show Ratings TV. You can find us on Twitter at BlairLovesTV and at KyleLovesTV. And remember, Blair and Kyle both have an E at the end. And you can follow this podcast's Twitter handle at TheStrainPod. Hi, Kyle. Thank you so much for joining me today. How are you?
Yeah, well, I join you every week, so I don't know why it would be surprising, but you're welcome. No, we're getting down the stretch here. This is the third to last episode of our season of The Strain. I'm already starting to miss it.
I'm surprised to hear you say that.
No, I mean, we've had our ups and downs. It's been a rough relationship, a little bit like F and Kelly, but this one is, at least based on the last few episodes, not a relationship that is going to end in divorce, because I'm enjoying the show right now.
Oh, I'm really glad to hear that. Well, today you and I are going to be discussing Season 1, Episode 11, which was called The Third Rail. It was written by Justin Britt Gibson and Chuck Hogan. Justin Britt Gibson previously wrote Season 1, Episode 6, Occultation, and Chuck Hogan is one of the creators of The Strain, who also previously wrote the episodes Night Zero, Gone Smooth, and Creatures of the Night.
Yes.
So,
a asterisk, or an underline on Creatures of the Night, which was, I think we both agree, the series' best episode to date by a fair margin.
Yes.
So based on that, the fact that Chuck Hogan also wrote this episode, and the title of the episode, which I, of course, don't understand, but you have been very excited about, you have been promoting or hyping this episode for a while now. And based on your tweets, you sounded disappointed, so I wanted to get into that.
Yeah, well, it'll be difficult to discuss because for our new listeners, here's our standard disclaimer.
Mm-hmm.
The only difference between Kyle and I is that I read the books and he is not.
Yes.
And the third rail I really thought was going to be the climactic moment from the books. The part from the books that kept me awake for 3 days. I always tell people, if they're asking me, should you read the book series, I say yes, because there is a chapter that will keep you awake for 3 days. It is so scary. And this episode had a lot of really, it was a wonderful episode. And I am not disappointed in the episode at all.
Okay.
I was just disappointed in the way that the events transpired, because it did not lead to the climax that I was hoping that it would. That being said, next week is probably a better candidate for that event to happen, because it'll be the penultimate episode of the season.
I was going to say that it seemed silly. It seemed silly for a while now to expect big things to happen this episode, because in almost all dramas, the third to last episode of the season is not the big episode. It's either the penultimate episode, which was always the case in The Wire and a lot of shows, or it's
every HBO show.
Every HBO show. You're right. Every HBO show, or it's the finale. It's one of those two, but usually they don't fire all their rounds in the third to last episode. But I still thought, I mean, again, having no such expectations or no hopes of that nature to go on, I still thought a lot of stuff happened in this episode.
Oh, absolutely. It was absolutely a great episode. I'm not in any way, shape, or form trying to deny that it was a fantastic episode. I am disappointed that the thing that I wanted to happen didn't happen. That being said, the book series, we've talked about this a lot on the podcast, the book series and the TV series are very different.
Yes.
So it's entirely possible that the event that I'm thinking of isn't even going to happen in the show.
Yes, because I seem to remember a lot of comments about when the Vampire Squad showed up like 4 episodes ago, that didn't happen in the books until much, much later. So
yeah, like the end of the second book.
Yes, so the timeline here has been rearranged.
That being said, the third rail is a huge red herring for people who have read the book.
Well, maybe it's trolling. Maybe Guillermo is just playing with your emotions.
At this point, I think it's Chuck who's playing with my emotions.
That's true. I like to blame Guillermo for everything, because I like saying Guillermo.
That's very fair. Okay, let's talk about. So, are we both in agreement that we thought that this episode was pretty strong?
I did, and people can, of course, read my review on showratings.tv. It just went up about 2 minutes ago. I gave it an 8.5 out of 10, which is one of, I think, maybe my third or fourth highest rating for an episode this season. Um, and I rated some of the episodes early in the season, frankly, a little too high because I was overlooking some major problems. This feels to me like a solid 8.5. Like I'm not
Yeah.
going to regret giving it that rating a week from now. Um,
Yeah.
it when I talk in my review about a lot is something that I talk about in the podcast all the time, which is the sense of urgency was really palpable in this episode. That
Hmm.
the task they had to do, unlike last week when Dutch Velders and Vast took a leisurely stroll to Palmer's headquarters,
Uh-huh.
this, taking down the Master is about as big as it gets. And so, just the idea that they're going to embark on that mission and that's going to happen created the kind of urgency that the show needs to help viewers forget all the wild inconsistencies in the world that it's created.
Yeah.
And so like Creatures of the Night, I think the episode itself, once it sort of got going, it had kind of a slow start, but once it started going, and once our people got out into the field, um, it had that same effect of where you were sort of in the story and you weren't worrying so much about why no one in the world seems to know that vampires exist, even though they're like killing entire apartments, buildings worth of people.
Right. Yeah, I would say, like, obviously there's still the huge plot holes that we have to deal with, but I would say, like, comparatively, especially to last week's episode, this felt like an episode of a mature television show.
Sure.
And last week's episode had parts that felt mature, but other parts that felt forced and contrived and difficult. Um, and I really appreciated that about the third rail.
Yes, but speaking of forced and contrived and difficult, Nora's mother is in the house for this episode.
Yeah,
playing a major role.
So before we praise the episode for everything else that was fantastic,
Yes.
let's cover how much of a mistake it was to put the two, like, the child actor. He's a fine child actor. He's a
Yes.
child actor, though. So to put him with a woman who's playing Nora's mother, to put them together, where they have literally no material that they can work off of with one another, because she's clearly not good at her job, and he's a child actor who usually is going to rely on the adult actors in the scenes, to carry them. Yes. How terrible! Like, I really don't want to blame the Ben Highland, I believe is the name of the actor who plays Zach. But, like, what a soul-sucking and dark decision to put those two together.
Well, those scenes played like a middle school class presentation in which the teacher and a student get up in front of a class and enact a scene from a history book. In terms of the quality of the acting. I don't want to kill the kid. Again, he's not Bobby Draper bad. I said that like last week or the week before. This isn't a situation where he is catastrophically bad. Like, he is fine. I don't understand the performance of Nora's mother. It's hammy. It's not nuanced at all. It's not a character that's written with any nuance, obviously, and we'll get into that, but the performance doesn't add anything to a terribly written character. And so when you take away everything else and you just have her banging on the glass, or banging on the iron bars, begging passerbys to be let out, it's just rough. It's really rough. Like, it's and my bigger issue, though, aside from the performances and the writing and all that, is this decision. I mean, I tweeted this, and I don't have it. I wasn't being facetious. For the first 30 minutes of this episode, Nora's mother was the villain of the hour.
Yeah.
There was no threat. There was no vampires. The antagonist of the first 30 minutes of this episode was Nora's Alzheimer's-ridden 80-year-old mother. Yeah. And and they're using her as a plot device to generate drama because, of course, she needs cigarettes, so, so the kid has to go out and get them. But as I said in my review, a smarter and more deftly written show would find a way to make that character not hateable in the way that The Strain seems to gleefully be making her as. Like, the Strain is like, yeah, you should want this character to be eaten by vampires because she's causing problems for everybody. Like, and she's this poor lady who clearly is not mentally well, and it seems like the strain should have worked a little bit harder to find a way to create drama in that situation, and maybe make her a little more human rather than just this loudly shouting monster who orders the child out into the vampire apocalypse. Like,
Yeah.
do we
Well,
have to
and
hate her?
yeah, I agree. Do we have to hate her? And also, I wonder, I was sort of like self-assessing the situation, trying to figure out what exactly irked me beyond obviously you saying like the performance and the writing, which weren't a lot of material for either of the actors to work with. Um, but is it, I think part of the thing that really bugged me was the thing that she needed was cigarettes. and
Yeah. Oh,
uh,
yeah.
and like
Right.
I mean, I understand that that's like a reference to the old world, and she's an
Mhm.
older person now, and that's like her thinking about herself in her 20s and when smoking was more socially acceptable. But like, not only is that something that we just like don't see in television that often, it's also just very, very hard. You immediately, as a viewer, like become
Yes.
disconnected when the child has to go and get cigarettes for the woman, which of course is fine because all of the convenience stores have already been looted or whatever. But so like it's not like anybody's going to stop him from getting cigarettes, but there's something that's just completely ludicrous
That
about that premise, and it felt like a TV. It felt like something that did not belong in
get,
2014.
get me my cigarettes. Like,
Yeah.
she didn't say that, but that was the
Right.
the thought of it, and that is such a good point. And I'm kicking myself for not making that connection. That I've had this sense that the show wants us to hate her, and
Yeah.
I couldn't articulate exactly why that is. It's just the sense that you get, that the strain is positioning her intentionally as an antagonist, and that's it. That detail that it's cigarettes she's asking for is such a, like, if you were trying to make her sympathetic, then make it anything else. Make it
Hmm.
something that we don't associate with negativity. But
Hmm.
if when you make it cigarettes and she's looking for her ashtray, it's like the show is clearly painting a picture of that character and dictating how we want to think about her. And that's upsetting because the character should be portrayed sympathetically because she's a poor old lady with Alzheimer's. Like,
Right.
we shouldn't there's nothing insidious about this character.
Right.
And yet the show is treating her as a villain, and that's upsetting.
Yeah. Well, it's trying to add. It was trying to find something nostalgic for her to be after,
Hmm.
which I understand that that's nostalgia, but like it's in the modern era, that's just not something that we are empathic about
Yes.
cigarette smoking. That is just the world as we know it has unilaterally agreed that we are not going to be empathic about that habit,
Yes.
especially on television.
Right.
And like I guess I was trying to think like, oh well, could it have been like that she needed some medicine or something
Yeah.
like that? But then you lose the nostalgia factor, and
Right.
I think that that's just like sort of the scapegoat that they
Yeah, but there's
they
always
came up.
this is the thing with the strain is like, it's like with the when I talk about how it's so stupid that everyone in the world doesn't apparently know the vampires exist yet. Then you can say, oh, but they established the Dutch Velders thing, and
Mhm.
here it's like you can say, it's crazy that they're making this old lady the bad guy, and why didn't she just need medicine? But you can say, oh, that wouldn't have been nostalgic, and the problem is that yes, there is two sides to these choices, but they're making the wrong choice. Like,
Yeah.
it would be better to go a different direction with the way you're explaining the world, and it would be better to go a different direction with that character. We can lose the nostalgia if the cost of keeping it is to turn the audience on a poor old lady. Like, that's,
Mhm.
it's like you've got to weigh these factors, and the strain consistently, although less so recently, I would say, is making the wrong choice with which factors to weigh more heavily.
Mhm.
Um, especially with like side character moments.
Yeah, I definitely would agree with that. I think that they are consistently making, or they were consistently making bad decisions. I think, though, that moment allowed us to get to something that you've been waiting for, which is for
Mhm.
Gus to become relevant to the rest of the story.
Well,
Um,
we're almost there.
oh, he's been seen now by a main character, right? And
There-
he's
there's a whole string of issues with that. Is New York City one block? Why do these characters keep seeing each other? It's like, why was Gus at that convenience store in the 10-minute span in which Zach was at that convenience store? It's
They've
ludicrous.
already no. They've already established that from the first episode that Gus lives in the neighborhood of the pawn shop.
Okay, well, was he? Am I correct that Gus was just marauding around chopping off vampires' heads at that point?
Yeah, I think he was so filled with sadness
Yeah.
at seeing his mother become a vampire that he just decided to go and behead all but his
Oh,
mother.
it's not sadness. It's rage.
That's
As I read, he turned into Machete. Like he was, he was a, he was a revenge film at that point. And I was like, yeah, Gus, let's do this, man.
it's a very good use of Gus, I think.
Listen, my stance on the Gus character is controversial. I recognize that. I think all the
Everybody
women,
loves him but you.
not everyone. I would say the women love him, and they love him for reasons that I don't think are reasons that I consider based on the feedback that I've gotten. Um, I will say, my main problems with that character are first that the gangster who loves his mother trope was beaten into the ground so hard, and I just don't find that interesting at all. I feel like that's a character that's you get in 2 seconds, and then I'm waiting for something else to be said about him. But more importantly, that he's disconnected from the entire cast. And so it's nice to see him at least being in the orbit of everyone, and also being freed from his horrible domestic story. He's not going to be stealing any more cars. At least, he might steal a car, but it'll be in service of a greater thing. He won't be stealing cars and then selling them to Marlo Stanfield for a few $100. Like, it's so we sort of freed him from his chores basically now, and we added a layer to his characterization, which is that now he has a genuine reason to be furious and seeking revenge. And the gangster who loves his mother, who lost his mother, and is carrying a giant axe while seeking to avenge her death, is a much more interesting character than just the gangster who loves his mother. so I am very happy about the events of Gus in this episode.
I think that everything. So I think that this episode paid off a lot of things that have been happening. Like it built up a lot of things that we get all this information, and we don't know what to do with it because the world is very inconsistent and the world kind of struggles to keep itself in one piece. And this episode felt very unified in how the world was functioning, and it felt like there was a lot of payoff for every plot line.
Yes.
And I also thought that it was good setup for the events that are to come. Because we've met the Nest now. We've destroyed the Master's cabinet, the place where he sleeps, the place he needs to sleep.
Wait, did they call it a cabinet in the book?
They did.
Did they really? So when F called it a cabinet in the first episode, he was. Is that another word for coffin that I'm not aware of? Like, I don't understand cabinet.
It's not a coffin.
It's like a cabinet where you keep spice.
No, it's like a cabinet where you keep your nice china.
Okay.
Like
everyone else was calling it a coffin, or I was laughing at F for calling it a cabinet, but I guess it is.
No,
why is it not a coffin? He is a vampire and he sleeps in it. How is it not a coffin?
He's so much larger than your average vampire.
Is coffin a size-related term? I thought coffin is a term for a wooden box in which the dead are laid and buried. Yes, is that not what a coffin is? Is that not what this is?
But Icorst also told Cichurkian in the World War II material that he was building a cabinet. Like it's what it is. It's a cabinet, and it's filled with the dirt. It's filled with the dirt that he needs to travel in. If you know anything about vampire mythology, vampires need to have their world connected to them somehow, like where they've come from, especially like that specific mythology of the Strigoi. They need to have the dirt from the land in which they were buried. Okay. This is me being a vampire nerd right now.
Yeah. Please. I'm sure the podcast listeners appreciate it. It is all over my head.
Well, in any event, what Citrakian said earlier in the episode was very important. He said, okay, well, I'll make it so he can no longer rest. Because in order for him to rest, he needs to be able to lay in the dirt of his land.
In his coffin? No.
Fine, in his coffin. We can call it a coffin.
I just cabinet, like you said, like a cabinet is something that you put your china in. I just don't. It's like a kitchen cabinet. Like, is he in a kitchen cabinet?
It's a vampire cabinet.
A
It's where you keep your vampire.
Oh my gosh, it's a flash sale on Amazon.com right now. Vampire cabinet. You open it and a bunch of bats fly out.
That's fantastic.
Okay, yes, but okay.
But yeah,
I'm getting sidetracked.
that's okay. But like, yeah, so like a lot of things were set up for the events that are going to come, right? Like they killed a bunch of his vampire minions. They now know that his minions are now on the alert for him. They found the big nest in the underground train tunnel.
Yeah.
Zach went out into the world and had one of his first experiences, like solo with a vampire.
Again, totally cool with it.
Right, I know. Part. Well, if you saw, like by the end of it, he went and he started to teach himself how to use a knife because he was scared. I mean, he didn't necessarily show fear that well, but like he.
Well, he didn't curl up in a corner and cry.
No, he didn't pull a Nora.
Which is what Nora would have done if confronted with that situation.
Right.
Which is problematic because Nora's like 20 years older than he is.
Although, can we talk about Nora real quick?
Yeah,
she was super brave and did a real good job in this episode.
She got her one heroic moment pulling Vass out of the tunnel.
She got two heroic moments. She pulled fire on all the vampires before Vass did.
Yes. And she also refused to be relegated to babysitting duties at the start by F, which I was going to lose my mind if she agreed to that. if F had convinced her to stay behind on this world-changing raid to try to kill the Master and end the vampire plague, and if he had convinced her to stay behind, I would have lost my mind. So I was happy that she made the obvious decision, which is, go away, F. Stop being an idiot.
Yeah. Well, and I think this episode, F got a lot of that from everybody.
F was just an awful human being and a complete moron in this entire episode, start to finish. I mean,
he's consistently been that character though, and like that's very like upsetting to me because he's sort of our main perspective character.
Yeah.
And nobody on Twitter likes him.
No,
like
I don't think he's intended to be liked anymore. Like I do take issue with you saying that that's been consistent, because until Vass was brought into the main cast, that was not his portrayal. He was being portrayed as the action hero of the series, and there was an undercurrent that he wasn't very good at it. But the series was very much trying to position him as the hero.
Right.
And then, as we talked about, once Vass was introduced, it sort of clicked him into this role. And I agree, the show has been consistent since then, of using him as basically the court jester. Like he is such a buffoon. Like he is so stupid. And this episode they directly addressed with that conversation he had with Vass where they were sniping at each other. How strange it is that the head of this important CDC unit is so useless.
Mm-hmm.
And that conversation, I guess, was what spurred him to charge in alone to the vampire lair through the tunnel and be the first one there, and then get himself in trouble.
I know, he got himself in so much trouble. I
mean, the Master was holding him up like he was going to choke slam him. That's not a spot you want to be in.
No, I guess we should talk about that since we're here, but like, the whole, like, the Master has a lot more powers than I would have given him in this show, such as being able to project his voice into human brains.
Yes.
Or the voices of his minions.
Yeah, I was curious about that. I was going to ask about the mechanics of that.
No, I don't understand.
Oh, okay, good. Moving on.
I'm a little bit confused, and maybe I'm forgetting something that's important, but I don't remember him having that power.
That scene when he's calling, when it's obviously not Kelly who's calling F, but the Master using Kelly's voice. That was what happened, right? Yeah, okay. That reminded me of the climactic scene in the original Mortal Kombat movie, where Shang Tsung channels Liu Kang's brother to call him and try to like trick him into thinking that his brother's alive, even though he watched his brother die. It's just very like Mortal Kombat nerds out there. You know what I'm talking about.
I like the game. I've never seen the movie.
You've never seen Mortal Kombat the movie? Okay.
No.
Well, last week you hurt my heart by talking bad about Nick Cage, and now you're telling me you haven't seen Mortal Kombat the movie. I don't know if this podcast can continue. This we might have to call it right now. This is troubling to say the least. We have to watch Mortal Kombat.
Okay.
It's
Okay.
so bad.
Okay. All right.
Okay, sorry.
I will.
Yeah.
I will not on the Strain podcast watch that. Watch that movie someday. Especially if it's on the Netflix. But anyway, yes. So the Master had some interesting powers, and he made some interesting decisions, such as not killing Satrakian's pawn and just sort of like letting him dangle there.
Last bad guy move.
I mean, yeah, classic bad guy movies just to talk too much, and it's it's interesting because like they have. I mean, it's obvious that that's a voice. Like that's the actor isn't actually the puppet, whatever it is, isn't actually speaking. That's like a voiceover that they've done.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like they still made it sound as though the person was speaking through the mask and you couldn't understand anything he was saying. And like nothing belittles the power of the Master more. Like I'm starting to like grow into him as like a full creature when they have the wide shots of him, because he's very intimidating, and I like the way that he moves. The way he landed earlier at the beginning of the episode, he landed and then stood up, was really cool, really well animated.
Mm-hmm.
I love that design, but anytime you get in on his face, it's a little bit of a struggle. And then he has all these powers that I don't fully understand, and he's sort of like not really as scary of a bad guy as I think he should be.
Yeah, I agree. He is more campy than I think this show is intending to be. I think that his whole portrayal as this like fast-moving frog monster or whatever he is, it's just like a little too out there. Like it's just kind of a swing and a miss in terms of the visual portrayal of him.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know. I like that scene. I like you're right. He was hard to understand. It was like Bane. Like you start struggling to understand what he's saying. Like you know he's supposed to be menacing, but you're picking up every third word and you don't exactly know what he's telling F.
Yes.
And then it was very Dr. Evil of him to like, instead of just killing his nemesis, to basically high step into the end zone and then do a touchdown dance and give everyone else time to catch up.
Yeah.
Question. What happened to Abe? Like Abe was gonna go attack him. Like, did he have a heart issue?
Abe has a heart issue.
Okay,
yeah.
I couldn't.
And he gets really nervous. Yeah, he gets really, really nervous whenever he sees the Master.
He has stage fright?
Basically, yeah.
Okay.
Which is interesting because immediately afterward, he tried to charge like the biggest nest of vampires you've ever seen.
Yeah, that was weird.
His character got really upset really quickly.
It was a different side of him that we haven't seen, and I wrote this in my review. I should just read from my review because I wrote a paragraph about this that I wanted to run by you.
Okay.
Because I'm not going to read from my review because that would be the worst podcast of all time. But I've just, we've seen Abe as this sort of, the way I describe him is this fierce, win at all costs intensity to him. Like Abe obviously has no time to deal with your human concerns. He's got bigger fish to fry. Mm-hmm. What's interesting, and what he keeps telling Nora and especially F, is you've got to check your emotions at the door. Like you've got to, you can't hang on to this stuff. But what we saw in this scene is that Abe is clearly still hanging on to his emotions. That emotion is rage, and I'm guessing, didn't we learn that Abe's wife was killed by these?
Yes.
Yes. So he is clearly like, sort of like a Gus-style revenge bent to him that we haven't seen until now. Like Abe has mostly been portrayed as just really, really good at what he does, except when he's dealing with heart problems, and very like dutiful to the cause.
Yeah.
And here we see him acting irresponsibly and attempting to get himself killed, basically, because he is so overcome with rage that he can't stand losing. And I thought that was an interesting thing for that character, that even as he's telling our main characters to check their emotions at the door, he himself is being crippled by his emotions at times.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, absolutely. And I think it's interesting because like there's clearly now a parallel between him and F, about like both having lost their wives to the master. Um, I find it interesting because the master did he was talking to him and he told him like, I already took away the thing that was the most important to you. Why do you continue to fight or something? He said something along those lines,
Mhm.
which enraged him, and I like that. I like that he is he wants to make sure that the emotions are left at the door, and yet he is the last person to say that.
Yes.
Like he is the last person to feel that, or to actually believe that. The only person who should actually believe that is Fett, because
Yes.
Fett, yeah, he has his family, and his two parents, but other than that, Fett is completely isolated compared to everybody else.
Right.
Um, it's it is an interesting choice. I'm glad for it. I like to see Abe grow. He's a very multidimensional character in the books, and he's been a little
Hmm.
bit. He's been singing pretty much just one tune
Yes. Very
in the
much so.
show.
But
But I think everybody sort of did that. As I said before, like this episode felt like a mature episode of television. Because I felt like, with the exception of the Nora's mother material, everybody had really good motivations. There was very good conversations between all of the characters, particularly that scene you mentioned earlier with Fett and F, where they were, sort of butting heads, and it allowed for everybody, like, they had teamwork, but they also like all kind of grew a little bit with one another. They all did something that they haven't done before,
yes,
which I really liked.
absolutely. And on the point you made about the character of Abe and how this sort of deepened that understanding, when we say we need like more dimensions from a character, that a character needs to be less flat, this is what we mean, because it's you sort of need different points about a character that you can latch onto, and from which you can triangulate who the character is.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the problems I've had with the strain, and when I call the characters broad and flat, what I mean is I'm only getting one point. And
Mm-hmm.
one point is nothing. You don't know what you can't place a single point in a three-dimensional graph. You've got to be able to triangulate from a different angles. And with Abe, up until now, there's been one point, which is that
Mm-hmm.
he met. It's just a very straightforward reading of the text. He met Icarus during World War II, got involved in this whole thing, and since has been like a vigilante on the hunt for vampires. Like that from the show is our understanding of that character, and there is nothing else.
Right.
Um, when you see this rage that he's harboring, which really underscores the what was basically a throwaway line about him losing his wife when he had that conversation with Icarus way back when he was in the jail cell. Like that's when that
Mm-hmm.
idea that he lost his wife was introduced, and then it has not played a factor since. When that becomes real, as it did in this episode, now we have a second point for Abe. Now we have, okay, it's like this character is excellent at his job and knows more than anybody else about this vampire problem. He's also blinded by rage that can occasionally cripple his ability to make decisions. Like, okay, we got two. Like
Right.
these are two things that I can latch onto, and now I have a better understanding of that character. The show did this with Fett when it had that little piece of exposition with his father about how he went to um, how he turned down a scholarship, an architectural scholarship, to a university to pursue a career as a rat catcher. It's like, okay, well, I already knew he was a rat catcher who was very sort of smooth talking and adept at his job, but now I know this other side, that he's like really smart and chose this path for himself. It's like, okay, that's 2 points. Like I have those 2 points to work with, but that's what I need from Nora.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I need, even for little Zach. Like that's if he's gonna play this kind of role on the show. That's what I need for Nora's mother. Like that's what characters on television shows who are featured in more than one scene require.
Yeah.
And so the strain is slowly making its way towards giving us that. It's much slower than I would like. Um, but when that happens, that's what we need for Dutch Velders, by the way, badly.
That's yeah.
but that like we're slowly getting there, and if it can go around and give all the characters something meaningful like that, then I think I'm going to enjoy the show more.
Did you feel like Jim Kent was?
I think that character was pretty much defined by his by the reveal that he had made an agreement with Icarus. Like as soon
Mhm.
as that happened, it was very very obvious, at least to me, that that character was going to die. Like it's
Mhm.
oh yeah, he's gonna die because on shows like this and movies like this, a character who makes a mistake like that is not going to live. He's going to be punished for that mistake. And so
Yes.
so I never took that character as like a long-term fixture of the show. He didn't seem to be
Mhm.
like one of the crew at any point past the first couple episodes. But
Well, and he's also a huge movie star who is playing a B role.
yes.
You don't get
Yeah, all right, he's
you
a
don't get huge movie stars playing a small role for a long period of time. Um,
right.
which I think sort of gave it away for me. I also I didn't say this on the podcast, but I read an interview with Guillermo del Toro where he was sort of laughing to himself, saying, "Wouldn't it be great if the best friend of all time is also the biggest betrayer of all time?"
Ah,
And that's why he cast Sean Astin.
yes. That's good. And
uh,
that was good casting, by the way, because that character, unlike Nora's mother, was sympathetic in a way, even though he
mhm,
made bad decisions and was kind of a wimp,
mhm.
at least at times. You kind of got it, and even though it was really like a little blah that his wife was dying of sickness and and they didn't really handle that relationship very well. It's like at least that actor has the charisma to
Mhm.
make us understand that character a little bit.
Yeah.
So that I didn't mind the Jim King character.
No, I liked him. I thought he was great. It's the Nora. You're spot on about Nora's mother though, being like it's interesting though because they did give us that same information that you're talking about. Like, she is a mother to Nora, and she also met her husband. Under these circumstances, like we got a couple of things for her, but then she
Yeah.
just has Alzheimer's, and she's just
Yes.
that, which should make her sympathetic, but it does not.
Yes.
Uh,
She is quote unquote crazy lady. That's it.
yeah.
Her role on the show is so 100% defined by her sickness that there is no point in considering any other aspect of that character, and that's my problem. It's my problem is not that I feel like she behaved unrealistically in this episode. That's a whole separate thing. Like I'm not saying that people with Alzheimer's wouldn't behave like that. My problem is that they're letting that define the character.
Yes, absolutely. Totally in agreement. Okay, what haven't we covered? Well, we talked about Gus a little bit. You feel all set on Gus material? Did you have anything
I
else that you wanted to say?
I need him to hook up with the main cast, which is clearly on its way.
Mhm.
Right, like he's clearly the next hero in this story. He sort of fills a gap. He fills the gap of someone who's just angry. So that'll be fun.
Yeah.
Fett could be surrounded by vampires and he's still making jokes.
Yeah.
And F is so incompetent. I'm surprised he doesn't trip over his own feet whenever he's walking. Um, and Nora, I'm surprised she's not hiding under a bed. And Abe, of course, has heart problems every time and likes to bellow things at people in a rage. So we're missing a character who's just gonna chop some heads. And so
Yeah.
that looks to be what Gus is gonna do, and I'm on board for that.
Yeah. So it was interesting because you were saying earlier, I should have brought this up earlier in the podcast, but you were talking about like how the ladies love him because he's an attractive male.
Mhm.
And as a lady who appreciates a male physique,
Sure.
I can agree to that.
Sure.
But I love him in the books too, and I knew he was going to be the axe wielding badass.
Yeah.
So like I just needed to wait for that.
Yes. Yes.
I found it. I really liked the entire execution of his plot. I liked that he kind of got to get his revenge on his brother and on the awful landlord. But then he just was also really heartbreaking when he found his mom.
Yeah, that was very sad. That was
Yeah.
one of the saddest moments of the series in an episode where we also had one of the scariest moments of the series,
Yes,
which was
we
Vass
talked
in the tunnel being chased by a vampire, which I thought was awesome.
Yes. My roommate and fellow staff writer on Show Ratings TV, Sophia M. Porter.
Sophia!
Sophia has been like sitting and watching The Strain with me the last couple of episodes. She hasn't been watching it from the beginning, but she was actually like physically screaming when that vampire was coming at that, and it was fantastic.
It was the thing that the Strain does really well, which I will give credit to Guillermo del Toro because I know this is him, which is the way the monsters move.
Hmm.
and just the way that vampire was crawling through the tunnel wasn't like the way a human would crawl through a tunnel, and that's what made the scene scary. Like the stuck in a tunnel with a monster thing is something that's been in 100 horror movies, but for the monster to be moving like it was made the scene, and it
Yeah.
was so scary. And we also, it was helped that it wasn't Nora or F in the tunnel, it was Fett, so it was a character that we care about.
Right. Oh no. It
If
was
if
the
it was
character that would
Nora
be
in
the
the tunnel, I would
hardest.
have been rooting for the vampire.
I know. Well, like yeah, it was the character that it would be the hardest to lose. Like
Yes.
because it like I know that Fett's not going to die there, but the stakes are kind of high if the most efficient character and the navigator of the group uh, were to be the one who were harmed, and so like it's the highest stake possible. Like F, we could continue on, and Kelly could come back and still haunt Zach. She doesn't have to be the foil to F. She could be that to Zach, or any, or
Yes.
even Nora. Even Nora could continue on. Like any of the characters at that point would not be as sorely missed.
Right.
And it's also because of the performance, though. We talk about Kevin Durant being really great in
So
this.
good.
Yeah, it was very good. That scene was excellent and horrific and amazing and awesome.
Yes.
And I also felt that way though about the vampire sequence with Zach, even though it was sort of silly that he like went after his phone and all that stuff. And that like then that he hid in the dark when he knows he shouldn't be in the
I
dark.
love
Like
that.
he
I love the
he
horror movie decision to run to the basement. Classic horror movie decision making.
from some kids who are probably not going to hurt him. Like
Right.
it's not like it's cops or like somebody who's
It,
clearly touting a gun.
there are
Or
still people walking on the streets. I mean, I know things appear to be bad, but it's not like the vampires are just marauding through the streets during the day, because they can't, obviously. But it didn't seem like we were in a spot where the first sign of people would cause Zach to flee to the basement, where he has
yeah,
to know there is the most danger.
yes, that was so upsetting. But that sequence is also very scary, even though he did make a horror movie decision. There was a really cool pull focus, which I know you probably have no idea what I mean when
Nope.
I say that, but when he realized that he had lost sight of the vampire, really really cool camera work that I really liked. And it wasn't as obviously as scary as that final moment with the vampire coming through the tunnel, but like I think that this episode, the third rail, was very very successful with the really horrific moments, including even the multiple times that they fought vampires, and then the vampire that shocked itself when it stood
Yeah.
on the third rail. By the way, that's what that's called. They said that in the episode.
Yeah.
So
No, I like
yeah,
that.
like a lot of really cool creature stuff, with the exception, of course, of the master.
Yes.
A lot of really cool creature work that I really appreciated.
Absolutely.
Yes, it was like solid dialogue, solid acting for most everybody. Solid special effects, solid good scares. Like it was just a very solid, mature episode of television. I can't
Yeah.
say anything other than that. Yeah.
I mean, I didn't like Zach saying epic fail at the start. I felt like, all right, Zach, we don't need Zach to be our sort of character that gets fed all the cool hip things that kids say these days.
Yeah.
I don't need him to say that. But other than that, I thought the dialogue was just fine in this episode.
Yeah. I think and I do think I'm starting to believe this about Chuck Hogan, having read the books. Obviously, Guillermo del Toro wrote the story for the books, but Chuck Hogan did the actual writing. He did the actual prose, and I'm starting to think that Chuck Hogan just doesn't understand modern language a little.
Doesn't understand how young people talk.
Yes, and he's not that old.
No,
I just don't think that that's a
he,
world that he involves himself in.
yes, I would agree with that.
But yeah, everything was very very solid, and I feel like super super set up for the upcoming episode. Do you feel that way? Like I guess like
I don't
I'm
watch
sort
the
of
previews, I should say.
okay.
I don't watch the previews. I don't want to spoil myself. Although Twitter does that for me. But I try not to see stuff in advance, because that'll give me. seeing is so important on the Strain, like the way we talked about the vampires moving. I don't want to be spoiled. It's funny with the Strain. I wouldn't object to being told what's going to happen. Like
Mhm.
from a spoiler perspective, I would object very much to seeing the mechanics of what's happening because that's what I want to experience with the Strain. To me, that's what can be spoiled with this show, and so I don't watch the previews. Although I listen to people describe them on Twitter. So, but based on those descriptions, I am certainly anticipating a big finish to this season.
Yes.
I think I'm still unclear on the timeline of what's happening in the big picture sense. I don't know if the city is about to fall or if it could fall at the end of the second season. I have absolutely no idea. Um, but I'm just expecting a lot of big action sequences, and I think that the last couple episodes have been steps in the right direction, and sort of um, lead me to think that this season is getting focused at the end, and we're heading somewhere, and so yeah, I have a lot of hope for these last two episodes.
Yeah, I do too. I really feel like trying to not go into spoiler territory the way I say this.
Yes.
I feel like everything that occurred in this episode, whether big or small, um, is going to set up the events of the next two episodes so much better than I expected from this show.
Okay.
So that's I would like because though I did not get the climax that I wanted in this week, I got everything that I needed to set up what would happen either next week or the week after.
Okay.
So in that way, I was very very satisfied with the episode. So I'm very excited.
Excellent. Well, yeah, that was a good way to dance around saying anything that would spoil it. But that makes me more excited for the episode. So yeah, no, I'm looking forward to it. I'm feeling good about this season.
Great. Oh, I'm really glad.
Yeah.
Because like you and I had a couple of
It's been
rough
a rough
episodes.
There was a rough stretch in the middle of this season that was just broken up by Creatures of the Night, but the episodes around that area, around that part of the season, were really rough,
Yeah.
and I was very close to bailing, as I talked about on the podcast. And I'm happy that the show has seemed to right the ship and
Yep.
and is headed towards an interesting place.
Yeah, no, and I'm really glad to hear you say that because when you were losing hope, I was losing hope
Yes,
a
I was
lot.
expecting you.
Yeah, but and and I, as I've said repeatedly on the podcast, like even though they've gone far from the books, and I totally 100% am on board for that kind of stuff. I have not always appreciated them substituting good material for bad material,
Yes.
like just objectively
Hmm.
good and bad material. But I'm gonna. I think I'm going to, unless they really mess up. If they royally mess up these last two episodes, I don't know. But like, I feel very positively so far about the first season of The Strain. I think it's just, it just had some growing pains,
Hmm.
some maturity pains, and I think that the world is going to function a lot better after the fall than during the beginning of the apocalypse, and we still need to exist within the world as we know it.
Yes, I
Just
think so
based on
too.
the way that the show is moving mechanically more fluidly.
And if you go back and listen to our our episode 2 podcast or episode 3 podcast, that was our hope. That was exactly, we devoted like an entire podcast to that hope that things would get better once they got more serious, once the apocalypse became nearer, and that is what's happening. So
Yeah.
our hopes are being fulfilled. Um, we also got an item of feedback
Ooh.
through our email
Okay.
from
Which
last week's episode.
Right. Which by the way, everybody, you can email us at the strain podcast at gmail.com. That's the strain podcast at gmail.com. We are happy to get emails from you, and we will read them on air. If you guys on air, we're not live, but we'll read them on the podcast.
Live the tape. Am I using industry terms right?
No.
No, good. Okay, good. If I used it right, I would be upset. No, we got a piece of mail from a gentleman named Jim, who emailed about the rant that I've had, or we both had, but I probably rant more than you do about the portrayal of Zach.
Mhm.
As and he made a really good point in this email about how the character behaves. The character is being treated as if he's a 7 or 8 year old,
Mm-hmm.
but he has the knowledge of a 15-year-old,
Mm-hmm.
and he looks like an 11-year-old. So we've got this whole range that, depending on the situation, Zach functions as. It's too wide of an age range for Zach to actually be for that character to make even a lick of sense.
Right.
So I appreciated him emailing about that, and it's like he specifically said, like, with the 7 or 8 year old thing, like, if Zach was a 7 or 8 year old would buy the excuse that F gave him in the last episode about having to clean up, or his mom would be mad at him.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's this thing that a 7 or 8 year old would believe, but an 11-year-old would not believe.
Right.
And yet Zach totally buys it, hook, line, and sinker, not worried at all. And yet he's also really cool under pressure and seems to be like his own little action hero, like Carl from The Walking Dead, and is basically like handling the world and he has the knowledge of a 30-year-old, but he handles the world like at least a 15-year-old.
Yeah.
And the actor looks like he's about 12. So we're really hitting all the points on the child spectrum for Zach here.
Zach is just being the stand-in child.
Yeah,
he functions as a child, whatever that child age may be.
He's a child of all ages.
We should probably cover this in a post-mortem of the season, but I would be interested in hearing eventually your thoughts on a compare and contrast between Carl and Zach, as somebody who does not, who stopped watching The Walking Dead after the first season because I hated it.
Yeah.
And I know that you stopped after the third season.
Midway through the fourth.
Yes.
So
that might be an interesting thing for us to talk about in a postmortem of the first season of The Strain in that episode.
It was interesting because Carl had underwent a character transformation between seasons 2 and 3 of The Walking Dead, where he had been this wimpy, whiny kid, and then they suddenly put a cowboy hat on him and turned him into a gun-wielding action hero. And it appears that Zach has just started that way. Like, there's no build-up with Zach. He is just going to be a knife-wielding action hero. So yeah, that'll be interesting. We'll have to wrap up the season when it ends in a couple weeks.
Yeah, it's exciting. Is there any other tweets or anything that you want to mention from any of our listeners or anything like that?
That's all this week. Shout out to, as always, Val McHugh on Twitter, who is one of our favorite listeners and tweets a lot of things that make good ideas for my reviews and that I incorporate into my reviews.
And she's very good at helping you in that way, and she's very good at being a conduit for me as somebody who's read the books and needs to talk to somebody about having read the books. So other book readers, please feel free to message me on Twitter. I'd be very happy to discuss with you. And always feel free to correct me if I say anything incorrectly about the books. Okay, and I want to give my classic shout out to the Masters Minions, which is a really cool fan group. You can find them on Facebook and on Twitter. They're a really, really fun group of people, really great to dissect episodes with on Facebook after the fact, and really great live tweeters. So shout out to the Masters Minions. And if you would like to go ahead and shout out Show Ratings TV.
Oh yes. You can read all my reviews at www.showratings.tv, which is a user-driven television review website that Blair and I both edit, and you can add your own review. If you don't like what we said on this podcast, you don't like what I said in my review, or you agree with everything, either way, write your own review. Rate the episode yourself. You heard me. I gave it an 8.5. You think it should be higher? You think it should be lower? Give it a rating. Make it happen. And weigh in. And if you write something on the site, I will make every effort to read it on the podcast. So you'll be mildly internet famous.
Well, there are 5,000 listeners right now. We're very excited, guys. We'll have the numbers again at the end of this month and see how it's going. But thank you guys again so much for listening. All right, great. Well, this wraps up our 12th episode of the Strain podcast. Before we go, I want to mention a few things. You can download and subscribe to our podcasts on iTunes, Stitcher, and SoundCloud. You can also hear all of our podcasts at our website, southgatemediagroup.com. Please subscribe to the show and also rate us. Follow the show on Twitter at @TheStrainPod and Kyle and I at @KyleLovesTV and @BlairLovesTV. And remember, both Kyle and Blair have an E at the end. Check out our website, showratings.tv, to rate and review The Strain every week, as well as all of your other favorite shows. Thank you again for tuning in, and we'll see you next week.
If you would like to donate to help pay for this and other Southgate Media Group podcasts, simply go to our website, southgatemediagroup.com, and click on the donate button. It can be as little as $1 or, well, as much as you want. Help keep this fun going by supporting this and our other shows. Thanks again for listening, everyone. You're the best fans in the world.